First, I'd like to offer my heartfelt condolences to the Adams family for your loss. My thoughts and prayers are with you during this difficult time. It's truly an honor for me to have been asked by the Adams family to say a few words today on behalf of the many players and coaches that had the privilege to be part of the Adams organization for the past 6 decades. I've been blessed to be with this organization for 4 of those decades. As a player, as an assistant coach, and now the current head coach of the Tennessee Titans. And I will forever be grateful to Mr. Adams for the opportunities that he gave me. I first met Mr. Adams in 1982, the day after I was drafted by the Houston Oilers. I arrived in Houston and was taken to his office, which was in the basement of the old APC building on Fannin. I'm sure most of you remember that place. It was the most enormous office I had ever seen. There was Mr. Adams seated behind the most enormous desk I had ever seen. He waved over to me because he was way in the back. I came over and sat down in a chair that felt much lower than his. At the time, I weighed 280 pounds, but suddenly I felt very small and very intimidated. Here I was, a small-town Pennsylvania boy, hadn't been much out of Pennsylvania very often, about to go one-on-one with this larger-than-life Texas oil man and NFL owner. But in no time, Mr. Adams put me at ease, and he had a way of that just by showing me some of the pictures and talking about some of the things on his desk. And I was quickly engrossed in the story of how he became one of the pioneers in the NFL. As he told me the story, and he was going on, what became clear to me was that Mr. Adams loved a challenge. His excitement and passion for the game were clearly elevated when he was told that he couldn't do something. People said, that the AFL had no chance to survive, but Mr. Adams got involved, and Houston Oilers went on to win the 1960 and 61 AFL championship. It was also said to him that there was no way to compete with the NFL or to sign their players. But again, Mr. Adams proved them wrong. And the AFL ended up merging with the NFL in 1970 to make the league what it is today. As Mr. Adams continued on into the next decade, the 70s, which I was more familiar with, we started talking about the Earl Campbell years, the Love You Blue, the year of the 70s. I think a time we all remember, probably one in a lifetime time with the pom-poms going, the excitement in the stadium, and just to see his face of telling that story. But we were interrupted during that story by the media director had come in, and because I had to go on to my press conference. I think I've been sitting here a long, long time if that hadn't happened. So Mr. Adams stood up and he shook my hand, and he said, "Welcome to the Oilers, son." And little did I know that 31 years later, I would be standing here today honoring the man that I'd worked all these years for. During my 12 years as a player with the Oilers, Mr. Adams always put together a very talented football team. We went to the playoffs 7 consecutive years, and that was called the run and shoot era, when we tried to make that happen. One of my favorite memories of Mr. Adams during that time, during my playing time, was when he would arrive at the end of training camp each year to give us a pep talk. Now, I don't think the coaches got that same pep talk, but ours was, again, he was about his expectations. And he did a good job of always including guys that he knew well. He'd say, "Hey, Munchak, hey, we're going to do this, right? Hey, Warren Moon, you're going to have one of your best years. Hey, Ray Childress." So he'd personalize it, which, again, really meant a lot to the players. All right? And but again, after that, the biggest thing, guys, was his smiling. He was always smiling, shaking hands, and the way he dressed for the occasion. We always looked forward to seeing how he dressed. The color combinations, the jackets, the pants, the ties, the suspenders, the cowboy hats. And again, it wasn't because, again, that was his trademark to us. That was his trademark. It wasn't out of any, that's why, again, I'm sporting one of his ties right here, right now. I don't wear it as well as he did, but it's something, again, that was always fun about him because he was so proud of his team. He was Oilers proud, and I loved his spirit for that. It was just fun to watch and see the players' reaction when, we were listening to what Bud had to say, but it was more about how proud he was of being of this team and coming to visit us that afternoon. Another fond memory for me during my years as a player was in the locker room after games. Mr. Adams used to come in if we won the game, that is. He'd come in after a home game to congratulate us, and occasionally he'd say a few words, especially after if we beat Pittsburgh. That was one, again, we beat Pittsburgh or some of those teams, man, he came right in, couldn't wait to talk. He had something to say because those 70s were still on the back of his mind. But again, he'd come in with some of his business partners, some of his friends, and he'd walk around the locker room like a proud dad introducing us as his players to his friends. And he saw the excitement in his face and how proud he was of us, of what we had accomplished. And I think that went a long way with the players to see how proud he was of them. That always meant a lot to the players for an owner to be that involved in what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. After I retired from playing for the Oilers, I had plans to leave the game of football and go into the business world. But Mr. Adams had other plans for me. He offered me an opportunity to stay with this organization. I tried to squeeze into a front office job, but eventually made my way into the coaching staff, where I was the offensive line coach for the next 14 years. For me, the most memorable moment of those years was seeing Mr. Adams in Jacksonville, hoisting up the AFC Championship trophy above his head with the biggest smile I've ever seen on anybody. And I'm sure you've seen that picture in the paper. It's a really famous picture for him, I think, of how happy he was. And all I can think of, imagine that in that moment of all that was going through his head, of how hard it was and all he had done to get to that spot and a chance to go to the Super Bowl. So for us as players and coaches, it was just a fun, that picture captured 1,000 words to see that moment for him. And again, that he finally made it to the Super Bowl. 2.5 years ago, Mr. Adams presented me with the opportunity of a lifetime to be his head coach. After the interview process was over, he called me on the phone and said, I always thought someday you'd have an opportunity to be in this position. In a typical Mr. Adams fashion, he followed that up with, but if you don't win, you won't be in it for long. I left with a lot of confidence, but I expected that, and that's what excited me about Mr. Adams with our relationship. As a head coach, you have goals, and obviously my first one was to build a winning team. And the second, though, was to be sure that the team knew the history and the tradition of this organization. And when you walk into our building in Nashville, I wanted to tell Mr. Adams' story, the same one that he told me 31 years ago. And I wanted people to know that if you worked here, you were part of something special. So we went to work we made some changes in the building to represent that. And we put together a timeline in our facility, beginning with the pictures, again, of Mr. and Mrs. Adams, again, back in college, back telling their story about how they met in college, and then a picture of the Fools Club when they got together, and went on for 6 decades. It lines our hallways right now in Nashville. And again, a lot of people are very proud to see that. And a lot of you here today are part of that wall, or why that wall is possible. A lot of the players, coaches that may be here obviously contributed to that story. And we'd love to have you come by sometime in Nashville and see the tribute to the Adams family that is there. We have left a blank space on the wall where we hope the rest of the story will be told someday, obviously a Super Bowl victory. We will continue to work hard each and every day to achieve this goal in honor of Mr. Adams' memory. Thank you for listening. Thank you for my time. Thanks. Thank you.